In business news today, three things to know. First, free fall. The Dow Jones drops by more than 270 points after the International Monetary Fund cuts its global economic growth forecast for the third time this year. Then, hack attack, why hackers have declared cyber warfare against the U.S. and what's being done to stop them in their tracks. And slam dunk deal, what's behind the NBA's record $24 billion TV deal, and why LeBron James, the king, is the big winner in it all. Well, Arise Exchange starts right now. And we have a slam dunk show. Hello, I'm Julian Phillips, in for Andrew Schmertz. Big losses continue for the second session as U.S. stocks fall sharply, with the Dow plummeting by 272 points amid concerns over the IMF forecast as well as corporate earnings season. Continuing weakness in the Eurozone and major setbacks in emerging markets are to blame for the International Monetary Fund cutting its forecast for global economic growth. The IMF says it expects the global economy to grow by just 3.8% next year, down from its July forecast of 4%. We will have more on the markets and the Dow. But first, we turn to Arise Washington Bureau Chief James Blue from D.C. with more on the IMF. Of course, James, always welcome to Arise Exchange. The headline is not good from the IMF. Tell us what exactly the IMF is forecasting and why is growth slowing?
Well, growth is slowing largely because of all of the crises that are happening around the world. I mean, I think in the United States, they do predict that there will be continued growth and that the U.S. is going to sort of lead all the industrialized nations in growth. But the real problems are in Europe. And really, if you look at the crisis with the Ukraine, there's real concern over Germany and the slowdown there, largely as a result of what's happening in the Ukraine. And so just around the world, there's a sense that things are not going to be at pace. And most upsetting and most concerning, Julian, there's some sense that the actual economic growth that was enjoyed by the world pre-crisis may never come back again. So we better get used to this sort of slow growth era.
Indeed, you talked about the stalling recovery in the euro area, but there are also two other things that some experts are saying. One is a geopolitical risk. We know about the things that are going on, of course, in the Middle East and Africa and other places, and also a long period of low interest rates. Would you agree with that assessment, James?
Well, I think that's right. There are lots of hot spots, and there are lots of places where things are unsettled. If you look at the Middle East with Syria, Iraq, the negotiations with Iran, oil prices are at an all-time low. I mean, there are sort of signs around showing that, yes, there is some growth. It's just not that great. And there's instability and there's uncertainty. And whenever that happens, that's also an impact on growth. And that's having a problem, that's having an impact around the world.
There was some people would say, James, that, Germany may be at the center of this. And if they go down, they could take the rest of everybody with them. How much do you think that assessment is actually accurate?
Well, clearly the IMF sees Germany as the linchpin for Europe and for those economies. As you know, the Eurozone, Germany is the dominant member, followed by France and the UK. And so the challenge is if the German economy shrinks or if it doesn't grow as quickly as it needs to grow, that will have a knock-on effect of the rest of the EU and the Eurozone economies. What's really interesting, Julian, generally it has been the developing economies that have really fueled global growth. That's no longer happening because the developing economies, largely through the strength of the U.S. dollar, which is rising and people are buying dollars like never before, that is putting pressure on the developing economies. So it's a really mixed bag. Global growth is not as good as the IMF had hoped, but in the United States, there is a lot of excitement because they've actually raised the growth expectation for the U.S.
Well, lastly, we have, of course, front and center these IMF meetings. How important are they, and what's on tap for tomorrow, James?
The IMF meetings are really important. One of the first sessions we saw today was a session on sort of Africa and the infrastructure challenge in Africa. And the first thing under discussion was the Ebola disease. Tomorrow, we're going to have some sessions really on infrastructure, how to create infrastructure in the developing world in places like Africa, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And of course, we're looking forward to your stellar reports. James Blue, as always, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, as we mentioned earlier, the Dow taking a steep plunge over the global growth forecast and earnings seasons. Here's a look at the final numbers. The Dow closing down by 272 points, as we mentioned. Here's how the other markets shaped up. Also down across the board, the S&P 500 hitting an 8-week low, closing at 1935. And the NASDAQ ended the day at 43.85. Here's a look at the top stocks we are watching. McDonald's, Japan is seeing red for the first time in 11 years. The world's largest fast food chain says it's seeing a sharp decline in sales over the expired meat scandal that many of you may know about. The company predicted a net loss of $157 million. McDonald's closing down to $92.81. Well, the nation's largest private employer, Walmart, says it's eliminating health insurance for some of its part-time U.S. employees. Well, the move is aimed, they say, at controlling rising health care costs, the company says. Walmart closing down to $77.30. And the United Parcel Service says it's beefing up its presence in the global e-commercial market by purchasing iParcel. iParcel offers international delivery service in more than 90 countries. UPS closing down to $96.43. Now for a look at commodities. Gold closing down at $1,210.80 an ounce, and oil closing at $88.79 per barrel. Well, for more on the U.S. stocks plunge and what this means for the economy, we turn to our frequent contributor and good friend, Xchange Rockwell Global Capital Chief Market Economist Peter Cardillo. Peter, welcome.
Good to be back.
You know, we've been talking about the Dow stocks going up and down. What is the significance of this sharp drop in your mind?
Well, from a technical standpoint, the market certainly closed very weak, and I suspect that if we get any other negative news, especially from the FOMC minutes tomorrow, if the Feds should be somewhat more hawkish than they have been, then I think, the next trip for the S&P is around 1900. Today's close was horrible. Obviously, we had the downgrade from the IMF on the global economic activity, not the first time, several times during the course of the year. But I think what really frightened the markets, probably even more than that, was the fact that we saw Germany's industrial output actually drop by a little over 3%. That's bad news because basically what we're seeing here is the powerhouse within the EU threatened probably by recession.
Yeah, and we mentioned that earlier with James Blue, our Washington, D.C. bureau chief. And, I guess I got to ask you the same thing. How much concern should there be over this, especially with Germany?
I think there's a lot of concern, and I think the concerns are valid because, Europe is in deflationary mode right now, and deflation is the worst enemy of any government and any central bank. It's very difficult to fight deflation.
But, Peter, there may be some good news here in the sense that we're seeing now the dollar much stronger than it's ever been in quite some time. That's got to be some sort of salvation in some sense of form.
Well, that's, that is good news, and I've been a dollar fan here, but we don't want the dollar to get too strong, because if the dollar gets too strong, then we're going to have, obviously, problems with multinational corporations. In fact, I think another worry, we're on the eve of, let's say, the official opening of third quarter earnings,
right.
And, most multinational corporations might shed some negative earning reports, not negative, but certainly the stronger dollar that we've had recently could impact some of those earnings, and that I think is a concern.
There's so many things to talk about here. We can't get to everything, but I want to skip down to the JOLTS report. Of course, it's the job openings and labor turnover survey. That's out today, and you know that. I think significant here, how do you reconcile the large number of job openings in 14 years with the drop in the hiring rate?
Well, last month's unemployment numbers were pretty good. So hiring was up. And this number that you referred to, jobs opening, certainly a good number. I think what the slack still is, obviously, is the participation level, which is quite slow. But again, you know, if Europe, if Germany were to join some of the other peripheral nations into a recession, which would mean all of the EU would go into recession, then obviously we could probably see hiring here in the States come to a crawl again.
Well, I got to tell you, we got about 20 seconds left here, but I'm concerned about this hiring rate, Peter. I mean, this is the fast food effect, but, you know, what's going on here, real quickly?
Well, I think it's somewhat of you might say, a fluke compared to the other numbers that we're seeing in the labor report.
Right, okay, well, we'll have to wait and see. We'll keep our eyes on Peter Cardillo. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Okay. Coming up, what airlines are doing to help stop the spread of Ebola when Arise Exchange continues. Thank you. Stay with us.
I think that people in America do care about what happens throughout the world.
Global warming is probably something that has to be addressed sooner rather than later.
From Somalia, the genocide there, and that's something people don't know about. They have no idea the brevity of that situation.
The first thing I think about when I think of Africa is like war and famine and disease.
And right now with the tsunami that happened or the earthquakes in, you know, Japan, we always look out for other people.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Global. It's Monday, so it must be time for a new round of sanctions against Russia.
Nigeria is open for business, and you are getting a handle on this situation.
Compelling. Time for liquid lunch, things that make us want to drink. Could she have been separated at birth from, say, Grimace? All business.
Money's coming out of these countries, and that flow is part of what's driving the equity markets.
Entertaining money daily.
It's about reimagining.
Arise Exchange.
Welcome back to Arise Exchange, and time now for our business ticker. Stories making headlines across the nation and indeed around the world. New Ebola screenings protocols are coming soon to the airports in the U.S. and West Africa. The head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention said today details of screen air passengers for Ebola mentioned by President Barack Obama yesterday will be announced later this week. Remarks came while the man who was being treated in Dallas for Ebola remains in critical condition. And a nurse caring for an Ebola patient in Spain tested positive for the disease as well. Well, the terrorist group ISIS is making about $1 million a day, folks. That's according to a U.S. Treasury official. The hottest extremist group gets its money through a combination of oil smuggling, organized crime, and donations from wealthy sympathizers in the surrounding regions. Well, Americans are expected to spend more money this holiday season than they have in the last 3 years. The National Retail Federation's holiday forecast predicts sales will increase 4.1% to nearly $617 billion, the highest since 2011. Still, analysts say retailers will need deep discounts to lure in shoppers, and that's me. And if an ordinary plastic jungle gym just won't do for your kid, you may be in luck, and you're not going to find this in Kmart, guys. The German startup Joopidoo just came out with a 24-karat gold leaf slide called the Golden Unicorn. The 57-inch long gold slide sells for about, get this, $12,000. Well, so far the company says it has received 4 orders, all of them from, guess where? Dubai. One customer even requested a ruby-embellished upgrade. They can keep that. Well, it's a headline that unfortunately is becoming all too familiar. Cyber attacks shaking up our business and professional communities and costing the economy billions of dollars. The latest? FBI Director James Comey says Chinese hackers have tapped into every major American company, causing serious threats to security, yours and mine. What's really being done to stop the hackers from winning, and what can we all do to protect ourselves? Well, cybersecurity expert and Berkeley Variatronics CEO Scott Schober has the answers. Welcome back, Scott.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Scott, I got to tell you, this is getting too scary here. I mean, it's one thing after another here. We're talking about almost every major company. Of course, we heard about Home Depot and, of course, I think it was Target and others. What's going on here?
Yeah, it does seem like there's got to be an end to it, but it's never ending. Day after day, there's yet another breach, and these cyber hackers, they're getting savvy, and they're just looking for wherever the vulnerability it is, and they're striking in. And of course, the latest with the J.P. Morgan, it shook up the whole banking industry, so no end in sight for sure.
Absolutely. And now, of course, Scott, we're talking about governments here. I mean, actually, this is probably nothing new, but the Chinese, I don't think that's much of a surprise. I guess the question is here, do you think that the United States government and businesses here can expect any assistance from the Chinese government?
No, it's getting to be a mess there. And really, the Chinese hackers, they're a little different in that they're looking to hone in on IP, intellectual property of these U.S. companies. And they're fierce, and they don't look at it as this is something illegal or something wrong. They're just moving in full speed. So it's something that all corporations need to be alert about and be careful on.
Interesting, Scott. You know, of course, FBI Director James Comey likened these Chinese hackers to a drunken burglar. I'm saying they're abusing it like a drunken sailor. The question is,
yeah, that's true.
Absolutely, and I guess the question is here, how can personal people, you know, just the average citizen, protect themselves? Because they got this new thing I was looking at here in Business Insider. Now, hackers are now stealing millions of dollars from ATMs with this new thing called Tayupkin, or whatever it's called, where they can just kind of pass by these ATMs and just break in there and steal millions of dollars. I mean, this is just outrageous.
Yeah, it's scary, and it seems like you put up your defenses over here, and then they're finding another way to exploit you. And a lot of it all goes back to the very basics. Obviously, the physical security, we know about what to do there, but when it comes to something where you're entering your password in, or even the basics of sharing your password, big no-no. I'm not even using a debit card anymore at an ATM. I refuse to use it. It's too risky, too high probability that you can now get hacked, not as much as the guy looking over your shoulder or using an ATM skimmer that's physically modifying the hardware, but that they could remotely hack into the ATM and actually get your credentials. So,
Scott, I think we lost you. I think we lost Scott. Okay, we dropped out. We're going to go to teas. I'm going to get a mattress for my money. Ahead, could a popular digital currency be headed toward a demise? You're watching Arise Exchange.
Because we live in a global, interconnected world, business news no longer stops when the markets close on Wall Street. And what we've discovered over the past few years of the financial crisis is that events and news that happen even in the smallest countries impact the United States and the world at large. As we bring together experts and analysts and thought leaders and CEOs and companies across many industries to not only provide the macroeconomic view, but news everyday people can use.
Arise News is a different kind of network. We are able to tell our own stories, and we're able to cover stories in a way that other media outlets don't do. We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well. Arise News is a place where we can tell stories in an interesting, factual, inclusive way like no one else in the business can.
Welcome back to Arise Exchange. The popular digital currency Bitcoin lost nearly a fifth of its value over the weekend, raising concerns that investors are losing faith in the currency. Well, despite a rise in the number of retailers accepting the coin, the currency has seen a steady drop in its value since last year. The question, will its value dry up altogether? Let's ask TV journalist and Bitcoin expert and the world-famous Max Raskin here to the set. Welcome back, Max.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, you know, all this furor over Bitcoin here, it plummeted so much. Why?
So what happened was there was a guy who they're calling the bear whale, who basically wanted
The bear whale,
who basically wanted to sell a bunch of his Bitcoins, about 27,000 Bitcoins, and he put up an order at $300 to sell all of those coins at $300, and that drove the price down dramatically for a little while. But interestingly enough, people bought that volume up, and now the price is about at $320.
Right, and I guess that's good news. But I guess the thing is, what people are saying is because it's so readily available, that might have been a cause for the drop in the price of this.
Yeah. So now it's been more dispersed. The concentration of wealth is much less, which people would say is a good thing.
Okay. What about other payment systems? They have competition now. Could that also be a cause in why there's been a drop or a decline?
So one of the interesting things is Apple Pay, and there are a couple other players who are starting to look at Bitcoin as a competitor, and they're starting to get involved. But I mean, it's hard to say why the price is doing what it's doing, especially when, as you mentioned before, a lot of companies are starting to adopt it. And companies, eBay is looking into it, PayPal is looking into it, and it's hard to know why the price is doing what it's doing when you have all these positive things. So it might just be market manipulation.
Okay, consider this a bit like a boxing match here. I'm saying maybe Bitcoin got a sucker punch, but I guess it's not really down for the count.
I mean, I don't know. We're going to see. Only time's going to tell. But that's certainly what Bitcoin enthusiasts are saying.
I'm looking at this and the popularity of Bitcoin. It came almost out of nowhere, made popular by perhaps could say some unscrupulous type folk.
Yeah.
But now it's basically mainstream. But the bottom line with Bitcoin is, even though it's down a little bit, some say it's floundering, the good news is it's up almost half or twice as much as what it was last year at this point. It was like $120 last year. Now it's like $320. So I mean, it's really not that bad of a deal. It's still a good thing.
Yeah. So I mean, the thing is, and one of the analogies that a lot of people in the community use, a lot of Bitcoiners use, is to the Nasdaq. So the price of the Nasdaq or pets.com could go up dramatically and then crash, but that doesn't mean that we stop using the internet. And even though there might be bubbles in the asset prices, the underlying technology is still growing and people are still looking at it and still interested by it. So, a lot of people aren't necessarily looking to the price. They're looking to the number of users who are using it, the number of businesses that are accepting it, the number of applications that are being built on top of it, and that's really what they would point to.
Well, that points to the question, who is actually using Bitcoin? It's not the average consumer necessarily that's using Bitcoin.
So one of the interesting things is, like any technology, a lot of the early adopters are nerdy people sitting in their mother's basement. The first people who had email addresses were probably they probably had Cheetos on their Cheeto stains on their hands.
Max, you're going too far with this now. I'm serious. No, but once again, I mean, we're in an age now, everybody's like super scared. We were just talking to Scott Schober about hackers and stuff like this. Is there any safety with Bitcoin purchases, or is it? Talk to me about that.
So one of the interesting things about the security is that it is the most hacked. I mean, if you could manage to hack Bitcoin, you would make an incredible amount of money. And so there's a huge incentive to have all these people, all these hackers are trying to do it, and so far they haven't been successful with the underlying. Now they might steal money from the banks, but the actual Bitcoin haven't been hacked.
Okay, Max Raskin, we'll have to leave it there, but nerds and geeks beware. Max Raskin is out there for the scare and dare. Max, thanks. Next, a slam dunk for the NBA, which stands to take in billions from a new deal. You're watching Arise Exchange.
I think media and reporters have a lot to answer for.
AIDS, hunger, people not having running water, the things that we just take for granted.
I think the most important issues in the world today are education and poverty.
Terrorism and war, I guess, is always. It's always an issue, and the quality of life of certain groups of people in certain areas.
I think inequality.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Last week on Arise Exchange, Hong Kong protesters faced another night of tear gas as they dig in for a third day of pro-democracy marches.
The question is, how far do you go in terms of cracking down? But that's a big risk that the Chinese government takes.
Lena Dunham has recruited a series of artists to perform a warm-up act. Despite earning millions, Dunham is paying her warm-up cast nothing. Watch this week for more. Arise Exchange.
Welcome back to Arise Exchange, folks. Well, it's a big win for the National Basketball Association. ESPN, Turner Sports, and ABC, not so much for consumers whose cable fees will pay the tab. The NBA and its television partners finalized a new $24 billion media rights deal that will almost triple the average annual fees the NBA receives, from $930 million to almost $2.7 billion. Oh, my God. Well, the deal takes effect in the 2016-2017 season. However, the networks and the NBA aren't the only winners. LeBron James also scores on the deal. Well, Mike Bako, sports editor for thedailynational.com, joins us now to explain. Mike, welcome. And I'm going to throw you not a ground ball, but I'm going to give you a pass.
All right, here we go.
I'll take that back. Look, this is a fantastic deal. But I think it was NBC had to act really quick on this also, because they were still in contract, but they were trying to get ahead of everybody else and securing a deal earlier. I assumed that they had to spend a heck of a lot of money more than they would have had they waited for their deal to expire.
Well, you look at the landscape of what's going on. NBC Sports, Fox Sports, trying to make a play, take it away from ESPN, Turner, ABC. So they see who are the stars right now. LeBron James, Kevin Durant. These are the biggest names right now in sports. They're seeing their ratings rise, and consequently, the rate that they have to pay to keep these entities also have to rise.
Well, see, that's the big question, because, a lot of the playoff games you'll see on some of the cable stations, but you're not going to see on the main TV stations anymore. But you got a resurgence now. Why are the ratings increasing so much for the NBA?
Because it's a star-driven league. It's one of the few leagues where, short of quarterbacks like Tom Brady and Peyton Manning, they're the real star drivers. You look at baseball with Derek Jeter, exit stage right. There's no star power in baseball. As great as these playoffs are, people are still hankering for seeing LeBron James moving from Miami to Cleveland, now opening up a whole new market, a resurgence in that market.
But I got to ask you a question, though. In the wake of all these scandals that are permeating, say, the NFL and stuff like that, you get one or two that hit the NBA in a bigger way or resurge. How might that affect the revenue that comes in for these deals?
Hasn't hurt the NFL. People are still watching. Ratings are still high. There was a momentary flurry of really bad coverage. I'm sure that flurry of coverage will come back once the independent report comes out. Certainly some news coming out yesterday with Adrian Peterson not shining a light on what's going on in the NFL. But I think what the NBA needs to really be wary of is LeBron James is in Cleveland. Kevin Durant is in Oklahoma City. Those are not big TV markets.
Not at all.
For these TV deals to really take hold, now they're going to be paid no matter what, but in terms of the ratings and in terms of keeping advertisers happy, the Knicks need to make a resurgence. Kobe and the Lakers in LA need to make a resurgence. The Chicago Bulls need to rise to prominence, because big teams in big TV markets will lead to bigger ratings.
Well, guess what? The Knicks are not going to resurge. And I love the Knicks, but I just don't see it happening. Look, let's talk about the players, because they're really profiting from this too. We talk about LeBron James, but all of the blue chip players will profit as a result of this deal. Tell us how.
Players that have good agents, like LeBron James, when he moved back to Cleveland, 2-year deal. Everyone was saying, why only a 2-year deal? Well, he was thinking ahead to this contract for the TV rights. He has an opt-out after those 2 years. Revenue is split between the players and the league. There may be a lockout because they could renegotiate the Players Association deal with the NBA in 2016-17, just when this deal kicks into effect. In essence, the salary cap could potentially rise $15-20 million. Those are going to be $15-20 million for each team that are going to player salaries.
And guess what happens? The fans are paying for it.
The fans are paying for it, and fans that don't even want to watch are paying for it, because ESPN is tacking on to their cable deal. Turner, TNT, these are going to be showing up in the run-of-the-mill fan who doesn't want anything to do with the NBA, but you're going to be seeing it in that bottom line of the cable.
Well, we got about 30 seconds left, but I got to tell you, that's really not good. I don't know if I like that.
That's why people like to go to this a la carte system, where if you want ESPN, if you want TNT, if you want your regional cable networks, but cable sports and rights fees for sports are really what's driving things. It's the only thing that's DVR proof.
All right, we've run out of time. I'm going to do something here. A blind pass. Mike Bako, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tomorrow on Xchange, we'll have the complete coverage of the International Monetary Fund's meeting in D.C., where finance ministers and central bankers from around the world are expected to attend. Now for another look at the markets, the Dow taking a steep plunge, closing down, as we mentioned, 272 points. The S&P 500 closing down to 1935, and the NASDAQ ended the day at 4385. Thanks for watching. I'm Julian Phillips. We'll see you here tomorrow.